think you started here. Yeah, it's Tuesday afternoon, shortly past 4 p.m. in Switzerland, and it's Space Café WebTalk time. Our Space Café WebTalk, the 33 minutes with Mahmoud Abu Wasel, will begin soon. Thank you all for joining us today for our exciting talk about the new space initiative of the Hague Institute for Global Justice. As always, we appreciate your participation and your ongoing feedback. And we see, I'm Thorsten Kriening, your host today and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and we are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. Our next episode will be up next Tuesday, so promise on that. We also keep our fan shop open and online for you during these hard days, where you can support us actively for becoming a space watcher. Edition 1 has cool mugs, awesome t-shirts, and brand new reflecting jackets, backpacks, and so on, and more cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love. Your support is needed to keep our work alive, and our life at work, whatever. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our web page in the event section and on YouTube. We host our Space Café web talks live on a weekly basis, and that is already the 40th edition today. I mean, that's amazing. And I hope you all marked Tuesdays in your calendar already. I mean, those of you that has been on the Eventbrite list have gotten a number of invitations for upcoming events, and we will talk about it later. But today, I'm very honored to have one of a very inspiring space ambassador in my show, somebody I do admire for his very open, very candid conversation in the sector. With a warm welcome, I say hi to Mahmoud Abu Wasel in our Space Café. Mahmoud has worked with governments on conventions, drafting and ratification of treaties, and international conflict resolution, policy and legislative drafting, and development of foreign policy. So he is absolute at the right place here. Once more, welcome Mahmoud to the show. So let's kick that off. The scope and the nature of the entire space enterprise has radically changed over the past years in ways that we could have never imagined. I think we all agree on that. And the civil society is critical more than ever. And a new paradigm is emerging. How we have the Hague Institute for Global Justice entering this mix. And can you tell us more about the Institute and how space and global justice interacts? Over to you.
Well, I think before I jump into it, I want to thank you for hosting us here. It's an incredible platform. I think we continuously commend you on the efforts and the success you have here. Thank you to all the attendees. So what we do, what the Hague Institute for Global Justice does is develop international policy, guidelines, framework, and so on for different elements or different facets of life, government, market, economy, and so forth in the pursuit of justice, right? Now, as you kindly clarified, our perception of what is or what makes up our daily facets of life have become space. Right? Space is in different perspectives. Whether you are an academic, whether you are an investor, a general spectator, the discussion, the conversation has become more standard than ever. The achievements have become normalized. what we achieve today, the effects of what we achieve today cannot be compared with the effects of the first moon landing or the first shuttle space mission. Those were miracles. But nowadays, having a robot on Mars to a lot has become normal. This is standard, right? And because of this, it is expected and in very short, in due course, that the effects of the galactics on our daily life will increase more so and more so. So what we look at the Hague Institute for Global Justice in this field is the assurances, the guidelines, the frameworks, and so on that exist or that should exist to provide a sense of sanctity and security towards this new reality, right? And I guess it's not only the Hague Institute for Global Justice, or the Hague Institute for Intergalactic Justice as well, right? It's even the terminologies and the way we think about things are developing, and then we're very happy. Simply, we're very happy with the responses that we receive from either key industry players, key influencers in this field, decision makers, collaborators, and partners, and so forth. I mean, when the response is so positive, and there's a lot of interest in essentially developing this area, the more you see of the bigger the magnitude of the response, the positive responses, and so forth, the more it becomes evident that this is truly a space that requires more focus. So I'm talking in an abstract sort of way because I know you've got some more questions.
Sure, I don't leave it from the hook.
No. But that's generally the reason, or that's generally the purpose that the Hague Institute, and if I think maybe for the audience here, the Hague Institute for Global Justice was founded about 10, 11 years ago in The Hague, in the Netherlands, between a coalition that involved the government and the municipality and the Carnegie Foundation and so forth, in pursuit of the direction that the Netherlands takes in general with respect to global justice and so forth. The Netherlands is the only country in the world that has a pursuit of justice in its constitution, and the Hague Institute for Global Justice was founded as a vehicle of sorts to pursue this mission in a more dynamic manner. So that's what the Hague Institute for Global Justice has been doing for the past decade or so. Our influence, our reach, our network is quite substantial across the globe, whether it's with the private sector, with the government, or civil society. And we're very excited to utilize our presence globally for this new horizon.
Okay. So, space is per definition globally. I think you can't find any other spheres in that matter. So, but let's take a step back. So, at many levels, we have seen space system contributing to the betterment of human conditions globally. Mm-hmm. So, might be Human Rights Watch, humanitarian assistance, the implementation of the UN or Sustainable Development Goals, peacekeeping missions, conflict resolutions, I think are evident. Where does this institute now fit into this entire schema? I mean, it sounds that everything is set.
Well, we look at our venture as our development into spacefaring peoples to encompass more than essentially humanitarian issues. I think humanitarian issues are quite substantive in this field. When we talk about matters that revolve around pollution or contamination of intergalactic bodies, and whether those can have repercussions on us here. And then we could talk about a few examples of where we think that may have happened, or how we, or the fears of what could happen in that sense, in terms of either causing contamination on bodies that are closer to Earth and could have direct impact, whether we know it or not. But if you look at a lot of initiatives in different areas that may have been in pursuit of private enterprise interests that had humanitarian benefits, clean energy is one example. I'm going to look at the new generation of electric cars and so forth. That was pushed by private interests in terms of penetrating a new market and so forth, but ultimately we benefit with less pollution and so forth. So even private interests have humanitarian needs, and those with private interests have needs to protect their private interests, and that falls in within the ambit of global justice. And governments have imbalanced approaches towards their space venturing abilities, right? And they could either be dominant in that field, or they can be side watchers, or receive be on the receiving end of negative effects. I mean, some prime examples are either, or practical examples are accidents in space or accidents on Earth from Earth orbiting objects and so forth. And how do those governments protect their own interests and their own peoples and so forth? How do they fall within the network or the web of global justice arising from us developing into spacefaring people? So we look at it. When we talk about humanitarian issues, we look at that from a civil society perspective, right? You're a spectator. You have no engagement with the space economy or the space sector in any way, but you could be on the receiving end of negative effects from others' actions in space, such as pollution or contamination and so forth. So that's civil society. Then you have the private sector that is engaged in the space economy, whose interests are also not quite as regulated or protected as one may think. And then you have governments across the world, right? Some governments have a stronger hand than others in the space economy. And as we develop faster, some may be left behind in this venture. So that's essentially how we look at it. I think the humanitarian approach, or the humanitarian elements are prime. They're the pinnacle of concern as we become a spacefaring nation or a spacefaring people. But the other elements that we have to pay attention to are also private sector and public sector in terms of government and so forth. That's our perspective, and that's how we essentially draw our blueprint into what do we do next.
So if I understood you right, so your idea is providing a venue for that, providing a venue for the commercial sector to chart its own destiny. Or is that a correct assumption or understanding from what you said?
More or less. You see, when you've got such a when you have such a scattered platform of interests, those interests and those concerns need to be unified into a singular medium. Mm-hmm. All right. So when your average civil society participant, when your average person doesn't necessarily understand what the repercussions of space mining could be, or what the repercussions of gathering lunar dust and selling it in a market somewhere. That there you have a barrier of information. So that's one, right? And the consequences, the effects, and so forth are not quite as comprehensive between society, private, and public sector. So there's a barrier of information that needs to be discussed in a more open and more elaborate mean. Then you have issues of rights and liabilities and obligations, as with any international law matter. And at the moment, I think what we have to govern rights and liabilities and obligations and so forth is our Outer Space Treaty, and the Outer Space Treaty is comprises of various conventions, and there are other conventions that could be argued to have that sense of effect. But comparatively, the Outer Space Treaty is not as explicit as other treaties, such as the Higher Seas Treaty or the Antarctica Convention and so forth. And one of the issues that is popularly discussed nowadays as an example of what needs to be looked at, developed, and so forth is property rights in space, for example. And this has a big impact, because the investment that is going into issues such as space mining and so forth is quite substantial, and these private sector entities don't have the international protection that one would consider. At the moment, everything in space, galactic bodies and so forth, belong to mankind. And that causes an issue for companies that are investing trillions into mining asteroids and so forth.
No, they want to get trillions. I think that's what in their business plan.
Yes, sir. So when we comparatively look at the Higher Seas Treaty, for example, the Higher Seas Treaty did not explicitly account for seabed mining as an example, but for the past 10 years, there's been a research center in Jamaica that's been working on policies for deep sea mining to ensure that when that starts, there are policies to govern how it happens. That's something that could be done for the Outer Space Treaty, for example. And then there are issues of what you may consider as customary law, right? Because a lot of international law conventions are not as explicit as domestic legislation. They're not as explicit as the law that you have in your own country. The reason is that they're used as guiding principles, and then over time, as different countries engage with this convention, you have customary law being built. It's what all the countries essentially understand to be the explicit meaning of this convention. But with the Outer Space Treaty, because it hasn't been triggered as much by different governments around the world or countries, and there's no expectation for it to be as active as other treaties in the near future, you have a lack of buildup or a lack of development of customary law that revolves around the Outer Space Treaty. So we have our different stakeholders in the space industry, and we have certain guiding documents and conventions that have been signed into effect over the past millennia. But with the development that's taking place, with the advances that are taking place, there's not enough to guide these different stakeholders or protect the different stakeholders to the extent that one would hope.
Thanks. Before we talking about your or the institute's or foreseen activities, is the private, international, or public space law moving in a direction that the Institute can underscore that? Or, I mean, you alluded to the Outer Space Treaty and the holes, unsharpness. I don't know what is the lawyer's term of describing it, if it's blurry, maybe. However, but what is needed on the international side, on the our space law side, that the Institute can then operate before we then moving to what the Institute is planning?
Well, currently what's happening is governments around the world are taking independent action with respect to governing their own nation's activities in space and their own markets' activities in space. And multiple problems arise out of disintegrated action taking place. A prime example of that is where does space start, right? At what point does space start? Australia has specified at what point space starts, and that causes issues with respect to national security, right? Where can you start at what point is a country deemed to have instigated action in another's airspace, or are they still in outer space, right? So that's a prime example of a problem that occurs when countries take independent action. And it's it's quite a substantial issue. Where does outer space start? But when you foresee the larger problems that could occur in the future, you come back to civil society interest and private rights. So at the moment, anything launched into space, anything in space is governed by the laws of the country where it was launched. But when we have space initiatives that take place or space initiatives that are the result of the efforts of multiple jurisdictions, which is always the case nowadays. You have multiple governments or companies of different countries involved in one space mission or one space venture. That's how it starts, and then how it may end is what happens during landing, or what happens during a crash landing, or what happens during the outer space mission or venture, and so forth. And because of this, you start what manifests are cross-jurisdictional issues. So if a space mission involves Brazil, Japan, Russia, Indonesia, and France, right? You've got 5 countries. Takes off from Ghana. Then you've got 10 nationalities on that space mission. And during landing, it has to land in Australia. So in this example alone, we've got 6 different jurisdictions involved. Something happens, or if it's a commercial activity, if it's for mining activities, for example, or anything else, if it's for commercial activity, you have cross-jurisdictional issues. And the national legislation of these different jurisdictions will conflict with other legislation of the other jurisdictions, if there is. Some countries have, some countries don't have space legislation, that is. And this is a critical milestone at the moment in 2020, I think, to 2025, 2030. It's a critical milestone to resolve these issues before these activities are so regular, and these problems can have huge impacts.
Let's come now to the activities you're foreseen, and we have a number of questions already from Karen and Ramin, and we will try to come to them later. So this is obviously the first opportunity for the Hague Institute for Global Justice to address the directly to the space community through us, and we are very grateful for that. So can you lay out your vision from space for space from a from a perspective that is, quite honestly, really very refreshing? So what how will you do that? How do you take that into action?
Well, one of the things we always love to do is talk a lot about what we do because we appreciate everyone's engagement.
Yeah, but we have a 33-minute format, so.
But for this particular exercise, we're bound by certain secrecy because of the involvement of different high stakes and government entities and so forth. So I reserve my tongue a bit as I explain. What will be seen in the near future is a medium to facilitate the development of space of international public and private law related to space. Mm-hmm. And when I say development, also addressing the issues that arise with customary law, right? That's one of the problems that we discussed, that even if there isn't a unified convention or treaty that governs everything, at least there can be a medium that develops customary law as the advances take place. And this is critical because for a convention or treaty to be signed by enough nations to have effect and so forth, until you get to that point, takes years of drafting and so forth. But the advances in the space industry are moving so fast that you need an agile body to have the blessing of nations to be able to develop customary law as the advances take place. So if in the next 2-3 years, as expected, we start working on settlements for Mars, by the time there's a treaty or convention to address that between nations of the world, that will take too long, right? So you need an agile vehicle to work on customary law. This is usually seen in the forms of different judicial bodies and so forth that take this role. That's one. Secondly, you need a forum. I think the first issue that we talked about was the barrier of information, right? How your average civil society spectator does not understand, or we don't want to, but may not have the time to dig into the repercussions of us developing into spacefaring people. And your private sector entities may not have the proper dialogue with the different governments because they want certain protections and certain assurances that governments may not be willing to concede to at the time. So how do those private sector entities protect their activities, and how do they know what the governments are willing to? So you have this barrier of information that requires a unified medium to have constructive dialogue on these issues. So the first prong is practical, right? Because we need to a lot of times things that are only research or academic based find difficult sells, right? It's difficult to sell to governments, private sector, and so forth. So you need to provide tangible solutions to be able to engage as many stakeholders as possible. So that's epitome. But also importantly is to ensure that there is a medium, a platform to have this dialogue between the different stakeholders. That's what I can sort of disclose at the moment. But I hope it illustrates illustrates well.
I mean, you can say what you can say. So that's the nature of our small family here. So let's take a few questions from our audience. And Kyron asked, about the specifics of the New Space project. I think we've been there. But what tangible results you hope to achieve with that? Anything you can allude today too?
Well, tangible, there's a lot of tangible results. But look, I think it's better to give you to draw a picture, right? You may have heard of different cases or disputes around the world between people who believe their governments have caused pollution to the environment of the city they live in, right? At the moment, if you believe that the moon has been contaminated so much that the sea level in your village has risen and you lost your farmland, what action can you take and against who, right? None.
Mm-hmm.
There's no clear path to do anything. I think this is sort of it's an archaic illustration, farm, village, but that's the idea for civil society at least. How do you know your rights and obligations, and how do you know what you can do to protect yourself as we become a spacefaring peoples? For the private. Okay, I can stop. That's
all good. I mean, there's another question that follows on that, and that's from Manon. Can you share with us some interesting reports or other materials produced by your institute on this highly relevant matter? Does that exist already, and where can people find that?
Well,
or in the future?
Yeah, it will be in the future, because as we develop our compendium of thought leadership in this field, what we see is different commentary by the stakeholders who would like to have some say into our commentary and so forth. Because in some senses, as information is disseminated, the stakeholders feel that they want a say in that information, what the critique is, what could be done, and so forth. But we believe the information will not be released in piecemeal, but as a whole, to ensure that it draws a full picture. As you can see from this conversation, there is a disintegration of the information, and it requires culmination appropriately.
Absolutely. So the last question are from our audience, and then I leave you off the hook. So it comes from Ramin. What kind of opportunities are there to join the project, and is it open for everyone or just professionals with years of experience? And what is the selection process? Maybe you can give a short answer in a nutshell for that.
Well, the opportunities for this project are like any other project at the Hague Institute for Global Justice. We have a tier level of involvement that is reflective of either whether we are engaged in track 1 discussions with governments or track 2 discussions or on a more ambassadorship basis or on a volunteer basis, or whether they are project consultants. So with any project at the Hague Institute for Global Justice, we have a sort of tier level, not so much vertical, also horizontal, but different involvement for the different stages of where we are now and what needs to be done. But the general rule is we try to have as much involvement as possible, because one of the most important things, as you can see, is feedback into what should be done, what needs to be done, and where we can go together.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm afraid we have to come to an end because, hey, 33 minutes. Yeah. So even so, I would like to continue this inspiring talk with you. We will continue that on our platform, our talks about law, international law. And if our audience stays for a few more minutes with us, you will hear some new initiative also from our end. So, our next events, and you see here full of lists. So it's a crazy month. So tomorrow morning at 9:30 CET in Europe, we will kick off with Australia. And no, for our German listeners, it's not the jungle camp. It's the first Space Café Australia that will start. Melanie Jane Ward, our host and correspondent in Adelaide, will speak with Jackie Carpenter on of One Giant Leap Australia. So I'm super excited about that, being a guest or already in a pre-talk with Jackie. Somebody you shouldn't miss. So if that works for you, I know for friends in America it might be very early, but yeah, it's better for people in Australia. So on Thursday, so in 2 days, a new episode of Space Café Black Ops by Ralph Thiele will start, and this time about quantum technology in space and quantum technology's impact for security and defense. I think something we all have to keep on our radar. And on the 19th or next week, I will speak with Elodie Viau from ESA in my 33-minute Space Café. A week later, on the 26th, I will have Dr. Peter Martinez from the Secure World Foundation as my guest, and as a brand new announcement, and maybe few of you have seen it on Eventbrite already, on the 28th of January, we will start another Australia-friendly event, our Space Café Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland. Stephen and myself will host different guests, two guests, to discuss current real-world implications of space law, such as the Hayabusa landing in their outback or the new Biden administration in the White House. That will be great fun, and I think that goes a little bit in the direction, Mahmoud, you talked about the dialogue we have to go with the civil society and demystify law as well, and that's very important. And that's our lineup for January. So all events are going online on our Eventbrite shortly, and as always, we would like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, or LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily or bi-weekly newsletters, and if you treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support will help us. Take out your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.SpaceWatch.Global. I know that I repeat myself, but we need your support to continue our work for you. Thank you very much, all of you, for your interest, and thank you, Mahmoud, for your exciting talk and being my guest, and thanks to the entire team behind the scenes for doing their great job week by week. Again, I hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy, and thanks for joining us. I hope to see you next week. No, actually, I hope to see you in 12 hours or whatever it is until the Australian things starts. In the meantime, visit our web shop and not web shop, no, not again. Visit our website and follow us on social media. Don't forget, become a Space Watcher. With that, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and Ma salama, Mahmoud. All the best, and take good care of you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Thorsten. Thank you all. Bye-bye.